Today we're reviewing the Kai 2 Speeds. For those who don't know, this is essentially an upgraded version of the Anta Kai 2s that prioritizes speed. Or in other words, it features a more low to the ground minimal cushion setup and a more lightweight upper. And then if you do want a pair after watching this review, you can get them for around 160 bucks on kickzone.com, but you can lower that to 150 with code STASHEDHOOPER. Gets them down to 150 for you guys and it helps support the channel. But without further ado, let's get to the review. Off rip, we always talk traction, and specifically, let's start it off with the traction pattern. Pattern on these babies is almost like a combo setup. On the inner part right here, inside of this hot pink lining, there's this herringbone traction pattern that's really thick and has really deep grooves. And then on the outside, it's not herringbone anymore. It's actually this multi-directional pattern that goes up a little bit onto the midsole. So not only is it an extra bit of traction, but it's also like a little bit of a caging for the cushion. Needless to say, a very interesting pattern. And then as for the material that makes up the outsole, I actually couldn't get that information. One thing I noticed whilst researching these shoes, I couldn't find a ton of information on the cushion, certain materials, the outsole materials. I don't know why there's just like no info out on them. So with a lot of this stuff, it'll be speculation, and obviously my personal how I feel about them is going to be accurate, but in regards to the technology, I don't have much for you guys. My apologies, won't happen again. But based off of just feel and how they performed, this is clearly a medium level hardness rubber. On this colorway, it is translucent, but in other colorways, they won't all be translucent, some may be solid. So between the deep grooves, the traction pattern, and the medium level hardness rubber, I think these would be really good for indoor use and pretty decent for outdoor use too. A lot of those Asian brands like Anta have really good outdoor hoop shoes, so I think these would kind of follow in suit. But enough about the tech and the lack of information or accuracy that I have for you guys. Let's check out a traction test and then we'll actually talk about performance. As you can see from that example, really grippy, and they have a really nice little squeak to them. That's not an amazing indicator on performance, but me personally, I'm a fan of that. When you can hear that, I'm a fan. But one thing I will mention about these shoes whilst talking about traction is that they were like dust fiends. I feel like they picked up dust really quick, and I actually noticed this whilst I was doing research on other reviewers' channels. I know Soul Drop, Sammy, I'm a big fan of his. Shout out to him. He mentioned that he wasn't the biggest fan of the traction setup and he thought it slipped out a little bit, collected dust like there's no tomorrow. On good courts, he thought it performed well, but on dusty courts, not so much. And I'd say I experienced that to a degree. Where I usually play at is usually fairly dusty, and they picked up dust, I'd say a little bit more than traditional hoop shoes. But with the dust, again, it solves your issues, but I felt like I had to go wipe more than usual. And then on a clean court, or when they finally cleaned those courts, they performed insanely well. So if you're playing on clean courts, I'd say top tier traction. But if you're playing on dusty courts, you just have to make sure you wipe quite a bit for them to perform well. So if we were just talking clean courts here, these would probably get like a 9.8 out of 10. But because their performance on dusty courts is really not that good for some odd reason, I'll give them a 9.0 out of 10. One thing I do want to test out though with an additional pair is how the solid outsole will perform compared to the translucent. Because with some brands, the translucent's better. With some brands, in most cases, translucent picks up more dust and doesn't perform as well. So I'd be interested to try out an additional pair of these and see how they compare. But enough about the traction, let's talk about the cushion. Like I mentioned earlier, and it's actually funny, when I watched Sammy's review, he talks about it too, the lack of information out there. There's no confirmation on what exactly this cushion setup is. So if I get things wrong, I apologize, I'm doing my best. But again, I'll be honest with how I feel about them. Just some of this information may be a little incorrect. But according to ChatGPT and Soul Drop, the cushion appears to be, again, if I get this wrong, I apologize, Anta's A-Shock Pro foam cushion setup. And then embedded within that A-Shock foam is what I believe to be a midfoot shank plate. So it does add a little bit of bounce, as you can see, bing, bing. Not a crazy amount like the 808 Ultras or Wade 10s, but there's still a decent amount of bounce right there. But as for how the cushion setup felt, I'd say the big highlight is that they felt insanely low to the ground. The responsiveness on this shoe is some of the best I've ever felt, extremely low and minimal, but that comes with some cons. I think if you're an individual who's an extreme high flyer and high impact player, or you're slightly heftier, you may not like this cushion setup that much. I mean, me personally, I like more minimal cushion setups. I'm not a super high flyer. I'm only like 195 pounds, 190 on a good day. So this minimal cushion setup, I'm personally a fan of. And I think if you're a guard, or especially like a lighter, shiftier guard, you'll absolutely love these. But if you're a heftier dude, if you're LeBron James, chances are you want something with a little more cushion. Still provides a good amount of impact protection, felt rather comfy. I played in them for like 2 or 3 hours, felt amazing. So I think it's still a good cushion setup. Like, it's by no means nothing, but again, if you're a high impact player or a larger individual, I'd say maybe check something else out. But to summarize, I'd say low to the ground, very minimal, but perfect for shifty, lighter weight guards. Kind of like Kyrie Irving. It's like it's his shoes or something. But I'll give the cushion an 8.7 out of 10. Now on to support. Like most hoop shoes nowadays, they feature like a million different things for a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I'll just kind of highlight the main things and go from there. Like I mentioned earlier, embedded within their A-Shock Pro cushion technology, they have a mid-foot shank plate like most hoop shoes do nowadays. Helps a lot with the torsional support, and like I kind of showed you guys, it adds a little bit of pop, kind of like a built-in Victory insole. Another fun little support slash lockdown piece is actually the Kai logo right here on the front. I'll give you guys a close-up hopefully in post. Hopefully I don't forget this. But you see the Kai logo, and it's actually made up of this lighter, kind of flexible TPU pieces. Again, 2 on each side, and that helps a little bit with lateral support and containment. So fun stuff. And then like literally every single other hoop shoe nowadays, they feature a heel counter in the back, but they feature something on top of that, which I actually really enjoy, which is these little Achilles pads. They feature 4 little pads on the inside of the heel to help with lockdown and also give a little extra cushion to your Achilles. Something you don't see a crazy amount of, but in past Kyries, you actually see this. So I'm a really big fan. I like that little detail. Helps with the support and lockdown. And then on top of this, they also feature this caging on the outside of the midsole. As you can see on the inside, they don't feature that, as most hoop shoes do. But on the outside, they feature this TPU caging and some of the outsole coming up onto the midsole. Helps cage in the cushion and keep it a little more condensed and bouncy, but then it also adds a little bit of lateral support. So those are just a few of the support slash lockdown technologies that I feel like were worth mentioning and not wasting your time talking about stupid little shit. And then the one last thing that I do want to mention that I almost forgot about is the low to the ground, extremely responsive cushion setup. That's extremely beneficial for the support and lockdown. More for the support, not so much for the lockdown. So overall, I think for a guard shoe and a low top shoe, they're pretty phenomenal. I think for most Kyries, you expect that because he's so changing direction in such quick manners. So overall, I was a fan of it. I didn't notice too many issues, especially surprisingly good considering how lightweight the materials are, which I will touch on in just a sec. So I'll give them a solid 9.4 out of 10 in the support setup. Now moving on to the materials, I'd say that's probably one of my favorite parts of these shoes. As we mentioned, that outsole is that medium level hardness rubber. In this colorway, it's translucent, but in other colorways, there will be solid versions. Really good for indoor use and even pretty good for outdoor use. It does pick up a little bit of dust quicker than usual, but I think with these solid versions, it will do less of that. Hopefully I have more info on that soon. But since we already yapped about that, we don't need to anymore, and let's talk about the upper. And the upper, I think, is where the shoe really shines. First off, it's primarily made up of this extremely lightweight mesh material. I'll try to get a close-up for you guys, but you can pretty much see through the mesh material, especially in the forefoot. And you may think intuitively, damn, if it's that thin and it's tiny little bit of mesh, is that gonna affect the durability? Which, smart thinking by you if you thought that. But no, this extremely lightweight and durable mesh is surprisingly durable. When you feel it, it doesn't feel super flimsy, but it feels insanely lightweight. It's kind of weird. And that makes up a majority of the upper, especially in the forefoot. And then in the back, there seems to be a more heavier textile material with a little bit of TPU on the back. And like I mentioned earlier, the TPU pieces of the Kai logo in the front. And then on top of this, an extremely breathable and ventilated mesh tongue right here, which I really like too. So overall, an insanely lightweight upper that also is made up of high quality materials and is insanely durable. So as for materials, I'll go ahead and give them a 9.7 out of 10. I'm a huge fan. But now before we get to the conclusion and the overall rating, let's talk real quick about the fit, the weight, and comparisons to other sneakers. As for fit, I would say these babies fit true to size, if anything, the slightest bit long. So if you like a really snug hoop shoe, maybe go a half size up, but for 95% of the population, I would say just go true to size. In regards to weight, like I mentioned in the beginning, the Kai 2 Speed is kind of meant for agility, lightweight, minimal. So these are definitely a lightweight hoop shoe. Out of 10, 10 being the lightest hoop shoe ever and 1 being absolute bricks, I'd say these are probably like a 7 or an 8, really lightweight, maybe a 6 or a 7. but really lightweight hoop shoes. As for comparisons, I'd say they are really similar, no shit, to the normal Kai 2s. Obviously, they're from the same company and similar technology, so that's gonna be a given. But and then outside of that, I'd say they kind of remind me of the Sabrina 2s and maybe even the AR 2s. So if you like any of those shoes, you'll probably love these. But now for the overall summary, I think the Kai 2 Speeds are just an amazing hoop shoe. On clean courts, I'd say they're probably some of the best on the market, and on dusty courts, not so much. But with that being said, taking everything into account, I'd still give the Kai 2 Speeds an easy 9 out of 10. An amazing hoop shoe with some amazing colorways out right now, and if you want a pair, go to kickzone.com and use code StashTrooper for $10 off your next order. And if you want more Stash Trooper videos, check that out. I'm telling you, it's a good video. Quality content from this guy. And he has a nice mustache.